Welcome back to another episode of Around the 412. I am Tyler. With me, as always, is my co-host Smitty. Be sure to go follow us on all of our social medias at Around the 412 and go subscribe to us on YouTube as well. Drop a comment, drop a subscribe, leave a 5-star review, all of that good stuff on all the listening platforms as well. Go check out some of the links that we have in the descriptions of each of these shows. They'll be in the listening platforms as well and in the description on YouTube.
Good stuff. Do all that. We're going to start out today's episode talking about the Steelers. Give you guys a little bit of a rundown. We're going to go Steelers, Penguins, Pirates today, just so you guys know. That way, once we talk about the Steelers, you guys can leave the show and get out of here. No, but also just breaking the fourth wall. Very early at the time of recording this, even earlier for Tyler than it is for me. It's also a Saturday. This is very odd for us to be doing, though we did have a special episode last Saturday with Steelers running back Alfonso Graham. If you haven't checked that out yet, go check that out. It was an awesome conversation with him. He's got fans in us for sure. So let's continue talking about some Steelers just as we did last week. Very different conversation. Some sad news to talk about it first with losing one of our own. You talk about once you're a Steeler for life. That was certainly the case with Clark Haggans, who passed away very suddenly. Like, this kind of came out of nowhere, just 46 years old. Member that Super Bowl 40 championship team. He ended up going to the Cardinals, which is who the Steelers played in Super Bowl 43. After that season, kind of broke out that year that the Steelers did win the Super Bowl, had 9 sacks in the regular season, 6 tackles and a sack in that Super Bowl game. But, I was kind of reading about him, some stuff that I didn't know, and I think that he was even more impactful off the field. In 2012, he became the first NFL player to support the Blackout Child Abuse Campaign, which is a nonprofit in Westerville, Ohio, that was founded in 2012 and serves families and organizations across the country, bringing education, assistance, and support to those in need. He wore blackout paint as opposed to the stick-on in support of the cause that people would normally do. So, to be the first anything, right? I mean, to have that type of impact, obviously great. And this seems like it was a great cause. I don't know too much about it. I haven't read up other than just seeing that he was the first NFL player to support them, which is obviously fantastic. I hope that, because of that, it brought a lot more notoriety to them and they've gone on to do great things. But yeah, this kind of came out of nowhere. I was actually coming home from the Pirate game when I saw this news and was just like, wow, that's a name that I don't know that you think about right away when you think about the Steelers, but then like you hear it and you like think about the defenses that he was a part of and connect the dots, and like he was, a contributor in those teams for sure. So definitely an impactful football player and a big loss. And you saw the outpouring of support with, his former teammates all tweeting like pictures of him or just tweeting his number 53 and stuff like that. So a huge loss here. And very sad news the last week for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, and it comes a week after we were talking about how close-knit that group that we were talking about with those 2 Super Bowls seemed to be. And obviously he was only technically part of the one, but he was involved with the other Super Bowl as well, being on the Arizona Cardinals whenever the Steelers beat them in Super Bowl 43. But yeah, it seemed like like you're saying, it's not a guy that you immediately think of when you think of those like mid-2000s Super Bowl teams, but he did have his mark. He did make an impact. So rest in power, and you'll be missed.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think the biggest way to anytime that anybody passes away, you just see like what people are saying, like the outpouring of support that he got from his teammates and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that really defines what he did. Like forget the stuff on the football field. That's a great point. I didn't even think of was we literally had just had a conversation thanks to, that conversation with B-Mac and Troy on their show, talking about how close those teams were. And, to lose a teammate and brother now, like that's what they call themselves. They call themselves brothers. They really do become that. You spend more time with your teammates than you do your families during the season. So, rest in peace, Clark Haggans, and thoughts and prayers are with his family and obviously all of his teammates, all of his loved ones. But to move on to the football side of Steelers talk now, one of those names that we mentioned that was being brought in for linebacker tryouts, they actually did sign. Nick Kwiatkowski was signed by the Pittsburgh Steelers. I thought out of the 2 that they brought in, he was the one that made the most sense. A little bit more of a track record in the NFL. I think he can kind of be that Robert Spillane fill-in, if you will. Like, well, at least in this case, remains what they wanted from Spillane, which was to be the third
Mhm.
linebacker and contribute on special teams. Somehow, some way, every season, Robert Spillane found his way into the starting role. More a indication of what was in front of him, I think, than Spillane himself. I'm not trying to like take away from Robert Spillane. He just is what he is as a football player. And unfortunately, that ended up being the best linebacker, most consistent linebacker on the Steelers the last few seasons, when in no way, shape, or form that should have been the case. Anyways, in this case here, I think ideally he's a special teams guy, comes onto the field maybe in like obvious run situations to help come downhill, kind of filling that Robert Spillane role. And I'm totally fine with that, but it's not like something that is like, okay, we got this guy that's, that need is filled. Like if they were to still add a coverage inside linebacker, I think that that would greatly benefit this defense. Now, are they going to add yet another inside linebacker? I don't know. I'm just saying this guy to me doesn't check a ton of boxes when I looked at what the team needed.
It doesn't really move the needle, like
Yeah.
in terms of excitement about a signing. It's a depth piece for the team. It's a solid depth piece. Like you're saying, he could play special teams, which is a big role if you're going to be a backup in the NFL. But it's not a guy that you want playing every down or even like several snaps a game. You just
Mhm.
want him ideally to really secure that special teams role, which is fine, but it's not something that's really going to move the needle on the radar of, oh, the Steelers made a big move at linebacker. There's still names out there that could be signed and probably should be signed by the Steelers just because of the uncertainty that we have at the linebacker position. We mentioned, maybe not last week, but a couple shows ago, just going through some of the names that we have in linebacker, and like Mark Robinson is the most tenured linebacker on the Steelers right now,
Yeah.
on the inside. So just because they did have brought in some players that have some veteran experience in the NFL, we don't know what they're going to be like in the Steelers defense. So I think that is, as long as they keep bringing in names, I would be fine if they did, just because I think that you're basically just like waiting, throwing stuff at the wall and waiting for it to stick at that point at the linebacker position, and hoping something does stick in a good way.
Yeah, when last season ended, I had a feeling that there was going to be some type of turnaround in the inside linebacker room, right? Like Devin Bush, pretty clear that he wasn't going to be back. I don't know that I was totally fine with him moving on from Miles Jack, especially at the number that he would have been back at in 2023. But I don't know that I necessarily expected it. And I thought it was a foregone conclusion Robert Spillane would be back. Like for them to have an entire turnover of that room of anybody that played significant snaps last year, I think, with what they got from that room, it's warranted. It's just wild to go into a season with that much unknown at the
Yeah.
position from one year to the next. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think they could have greatly benefited I don't know if the door is still open. It typically isn't when it comes to the Steelers, but, Quan Alexander was here and left. I think they would greatly benefit from a guy like that because he can also, shift into the slot and cover a tight end out there and that kind of, two birds with one stone. So I think that
I think the door is kind of shut on that. It just in my
if I was
opinion.
taking a guess,
If
yeah,
that was going to happen, I feel like it would have happened the week he was in Pittsburgh.
yeah, and that's
It's been too
kind of
long after the fact.
yeah. I agree. Even if you're not even looking at like Steelers historical tendencies of a guy leaving and not signing him, like I just think because that's typically even if that they're not signing him, even if it like the door's open from the player's side the next day. Like if that guy leaves Pittsburgh, it's not happening. With Omar Khan, maybe that aspect is a little bit different, but I think with how much time has gone for any team, I would be thinking, yeah, that's not really a possibility at this point. But
Mhm.
who knows? It's yet to be seen. Like we kind of got going into next year's draft, we're gonna have kind of an idea of how Khan and them operate. As far as free agency, we could still be kind of learning. We've obviously gotten through the first several waves of free agency, but how's he approached these like, the late free agency, like right before training camp or when the rosters have to trim down? Like we're gonna get our first taste of how that works from his side too. So I'm excited to see how it all plays out, but I would agree. I think in terms of that specific player in Quan Alexander, I do think the door is closed. Now, is there somebody else out there that they're going to add to the roster? I still think there is a move to be made. And, ESPN put out a thing like the last move the Steelers need to make this offseason is extending Alex Highsmith. And I do, again, like going back several weeks at this point, I do think that gets done before training camp. I think that is a move that needs to happen. I think people are to be surprised by the dollar amount being less. That I think he's going to get under market value. I think he's willing to take that to stay in Pittsburgh. But I look at that, and I'm not even including that as being a move. I still think they're going to add somewhere to this roster, whether that is at that slot corner, whether that is another inside linebacker. I think that there is another addition to be made to this team still.
Yeah, no, I
Or
think
if
so
one of those
too.
guys don't win, I don't want to, we just had Alfonso on, and I hope that him and Anthony McFarland both show out. But, if they're not seeing enough in training camp, I wouldn't roll out them adding another running back too to take that third running back job.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, the positions that you're bringing up are positions that we brought up on the show that don't have a substantial depth behind them. We're okay with the starters, and that's fine and well. But we've seen in Steelers seasons, the starters aren't always going to be healthy on the field all the time. So you have to secure that depth in the positions you're talking about. I think the Steelers need to make moves just to at least give themselves more insurance policies, even if like the starters don't work out, say for example like the middle linebackers, or if the health doesn't keep up on the outside linebackers. Like there's multiple positions that you need depth, and that's important. And I wasn't even thinking about running back, I was only thinking defensively. And running back's a good point too. Like if Jalen Warren or Najee Harris goes down, then suddenly running back 3 becomes way more important than we're thinking of it is right now, outside of the special teams role. So I think especially offensively, running back is the position where if you're going to look to add somebody that's on the market still right now, that would be the case. But yeah, I think that the Steelers definitely need to add before we get to training camp. There's positions that I think that you could. It would be good to have more of a battle there as well. Just to bring in more guys, kind of like what I was saying, like just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and then try to build your roster around it.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were saying the running back thing, like it's not going to be like, Dalvin Cook, right, was mentioned. I think it was Joy Taylor said that he would be a great fit in Pittsburgh. I mean, obviously the player has been, so good for so long. And it's like, I'm not saying no to Dalvin Cook, but like, can we be realistic here for a second? Like him, Najee Harris. I don't know that people like the national talking heads know who Jalen Warren is or the type of season he had last year. Cause I don't know that would be their thought in terms of a landing spot for Dalvin Cook if they knew who Jalen Warren was. The one
Yeah.
name that I will say, like, I wouldn't totally like throw away, Leonard Fournette, who obviously has the name recognition. I just don't think that he's in a capacity to push for a starting job at this point in his career. And if you're talking about him coming for, close to a vet min, like, him, Najee, and Jalen Warren, that makes much more sense as a three-headed, running back rotation than adding Dalvin Cook. Like, Dalvin Cook is going to command way more money, and he's not going to take that less of a role as you're talking. Like, in Leonard Fournette's case, he was part of a committee last year, even. I just I don't see that happening either, but that was the other name that was kind of thrown out there. I think it was Ryan Leaf that said he would like to see Leonard Fournette in Pittsburgh. And even again, when I saw his reply to somebody, I'm not trying to discredit his opinion, but when I saw his reply to somebody, no mention of Jalen Warren. He was talking about giving Najee breathers. So it's like people just don't know he exists.
Maybe they know he exists, but maybe they're just thinking like if they bring in a guy like that, like if you're gonna have a running back play special teams, then one of them has to, and it would probably default to Jalen Warren at that point, because I can't imagine Leonard Fournette playing special teams.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I can't imagine any of the three of them, to be honest. I don't know what Jalen contributes on special teams. Like,
I don't know. That's why I
Yeah.
don't think that, like, as far as bringing in a running back from the outside, I don't think it would be a guy like a Dalvin Cook or a Leonard Fournette, because that RB3 role is, and we
Yeah.
mentioned it last week when we were talking to Alfonso, like that's somebody that you expect to be contribute on special teams, because the other two are going to be contributing offensively. So bringing in a big name like that has had a lot of starting experience, I just don't see the fit in terms of like what they bring to the team. If you're going to bring them in as RB3, they need to play special teams at that point.
Yeah. That's actually very true. I honestly wasn't thinking about that, to be quite honest. But I will say that is true from the special teams perspective. You don't know how that fits in. But if Najee, unfortunately, knock on wood, were to go down or something, Leonard Fournette, similar style running back, like that would almost be able to just seamlessly fit. Not saying they're the same talent at this point in his career or the same effectiveness, but from a style standpoint, you feel like he could fit into the scheme because we've seen Najee do it, and he's a similar back.
Yeah. No, I agree.
They did make a roster move. The Steelers did, releasing Anthony Miller. He actually tweeted out the day before it became official
Wasn't like
that
thank
he
you
was being
Pittsburgh or
released.
something like that.
Yeah, thank you Pittsburgh with a heart. But because it was on Juneteenth, like roster transactions couldn't take place that day. So the next day, it was put out that they had released him. Kind of unfortunate. We never got to see, what Anthony Miller could have been in Pittsburgh. I know that we were kind of like going back to last year, kind of excited about it just because, him and Mitch spent time together in Chicago. We thought it was at least a viable slot option for them. Then he gets hurt last year, misses the entire season, comes back this year. You feel like is, going to compete for a spot. Then they get Allen Robinson in here, and it's like, that's probably the vet that they're going to go with to, kind of be the vet pairing with Calvin Austin. So it kind of left Anthony Miller out in the woods, and you were wondering if there was a role for him on this team. This answers that question. It's unfortunate, but not at all surprising. I mean, had he made, I think he had like a $1 million salary, but it wasn't guaranteed. So, you weren't going to pay the guy $1 million to go into camp, I guess, and get to that point and pay that. So, unfortunately, I have to agree with the move, but all the best to Anthony Miller. I hope he's able to latch on somewhere else. I hope them releasing him at this point, before we get to training camp, gives him the opportunity to go somewhere else. Because I'm still like super intrigued by the skill set. It just, it was too crowded of a room here, even though it's not like, I don't think of the Steelers wide receiver room right now as we go into the season. Now they could prove it once the season starts. I don't think of one of them as like the best receiving units right now in football. But when you look at like, okay, past Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Calvin Austin, Allen Robinson, those four were for sure making the roster. So Anthony Miller was probably competing for one spot with the likes of, Miles Boykin, Hakeem Butler, Gunnar Olszewski, like for one spot. So it was going to be very hard for him to make this roster.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're going to look for like a slot receiver, you already have. I mean, we talked about that. You kind of already have that with Pat Freiermuth for a lot of the offensive snaps. And then you look at a guy like Calvin Austin is going to be healthy this year, and he could see a lot of slot snaps himself potentially in the offense. So it makes sense from a Steelers perspective why, but it does stink because whenever they signed him, we were both intrigued about the signing and wondering what it could look like at Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, we never got to see that to fruition. But as you just mentioned, there are several guys that are still rostered on the Steelers that could be making this 53-man roster as a wide receiver. So there's four guys that are starters or not starters, but there's four guys that are going to make the roster seemingly right now, and then they're like you said, they're fighting for one spot. So only one of them is going to make it. I mean, Gunnar was here last year, so he kind of has like a foot in the race still. And then Hakeem Butler, Miles Boykin, those guys have size and little like differences from the other wide receivers currently on the Steelers.
Miles might be like their best special team, like one of their top 3 special teams player on the team, not just amongst wide receivers, just in general.
Yeah, so that could give him just like the lead in the race for it. But yeah, it doesn't seem like there was just enough room to keep him around. Yeah. So it's unfortunate for him. Hopefully he finds a place to stick, but yeah, that's just kind of the way it goes.
Wrapping up with the Steelers stuff, you were probably like, what does this even mean? When you read the notes, if you looked at the notes, I had looking at Steelers tendencies. So
yeah, I was wondering what that
I was watching. So around draft time, I already knew who Brett Coleman was, one of my favorite like football YouTubers, great follow on Twitter. But he has a show, Bootleg Football, with EJ, who's a Bears guy, and they're doing a really cool series right now, going through every team in the NFL. But they were doing a Steelers one. It was like the title of it was like the Steelers are so back. So I was like, okay, obviously I got to watch this video. And they're kind of breaking down everything about the team. But they go as far as putting up graphics in terms of like the types of zone, the coverages that they're running defensively, the types of like runs that they have, like what they're running out of.
Mm-hmm.
Percentage of blitzing on third down, and then like passing offense overview in terms of like how much the team is running play action and stuff. And I thought all the information that they were putting out there was very interesting, and I appreciated the fact that they, gathered all of that for people to take a look at and actually visually look at. So if you look at the Steelers defense, they ran the least amount of quarters coverage last year, just 2.2%, which was 32nd in the NFL. What they run a lot of, and this is super basic defenses, was cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, and cover 5. They were top 10 in all of those, which to me just says they feel so good about the way that they coach their defensive backs in defense in general, but really this is a lot relying on the defensive backs,
Mm-hmm.
and the players that they have specifically to fill those roles, that they don't even care if it's very apparent what type of defense they're in, because they don't even like disguise a whole lot within these defenses. They're not meant to do that. So it kind of says we feel so good about our coaching, we feel so good about our players. You can watch what we do in a game on tape because we're doing the exact same thing in practice anyway. We're putting it all out there. We just feel that good about where we are defensively. It doesn't even matter if you know what we're doing, which is very interesting. And it, kind of thinking back now, you almost wonder, does it make them too susceptible? Like, are they a little bit too easy to figure out defensively? But the Steelers, for most of our lives have, even at their worst, like when they can't stop the run, they still average out to be at worst a middle of the pack defense because of how
Mm-hmm.
good their pass rush is. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting to take a look at. They're not running a whole lot of, unique defensive coverages, and I wouldn't expect the Steelers would do so, but they've been effective in doing this. So I don't know how to take it.
Well, maybe that has to do with. I mean, you mentioned that the Steelers have always either had a great defense or at worst like a middle of the road defense. And when you look at the defenses over at least our lifetime, it's all been filled with great players. So maybe it's just a case of like, even if we run like a super vanilla defense over and over and over again, we have the players to make that defense work. Because
Mm-hmm.
even in those coverages where you are really relying on your coaches and the players that you have in that secondary, think about the front seven for the Steelers and getting to like the quarterback, for example. Like if everybody's healthy, the secondary gets a breather a lot of the time because of what that front seven can do in the pass rush. So maybe it's just a case of they have the personnel where a vanilla defense and you just do it over and over again and everybody kind of knows what you're lining up in, but they just can't stop it anyway because of the likes of Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith. And then on the back end, you do have a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick in that free safety role.
I
Like
think
they have the personnel to make the defenses work.
We already know how great Minkah is, but like listening to them talk about him, they both think he's the best safety in the NFL. And like you think about the rest of the talent that's within that secondary. I'm not trying to knock anybody else, but without him, like I don't know where they're at from a secondary standpoint. But I almost wonder, with this is a question for you and to everybody. You were talking about the pass rush there and it kind of like taking the pressure off of the secondary. But when we talk about with how vanilla these defenses are and being so reliant on guys communicating on the back end, like, are we not giving the secondary enough credit over the years for this? Like, are we giving maybe too much credit to the pass rush and not enough credit to the defensive backs?
Depends on the year. If we're talking like 2018, I'm absolutely not giving any credit to the defensive backs.
All right.
Because, yeah. I guess
And I don't know what percentage of defenses.
No, I think most recently with the secondary that we had, whether that was with Minkah, Terrell Edmonds, Joe Hayden, I think we didn't give enough credit.
2019 secondary was awesome.
Yeah, and I do think that the secondary does kind of get fallen behind a little bit from the pass rush, just because of how electric the pass rush can be. You have the best edge rusher in the NFL of TJ Watt. And some people will not give the secondary credit for what the pass rush also does, and that's just get to the quarterback and suck up time from that offense. But I do think that they do need to get their roses as well. I think the secondary over the past several years has been good, especially because you've lost some of the guys from that 2019 defense. Like we didn't have Joe Hayden last year, and I thought like Levi Wallace played pretty well. They experimented at the other corner spots, and then now this year we're really going to see what can be different, because there's going to be what seems like a lot of new faces. You're not going to have the same strong safety. It looks like you could potentially have two new starting cornerbacks, whether what they do with, I mean, Levi Wallace could end up being started, but you have Joey Porter Jr., Patrick Peterson. We'll see how that works out. But there's going to be a lot of new within that secondary, at least in terms of the starters. So it'll be interesting to see how much that carries over and how much they communicate well. Plus, I'm going into the year, as long as you have a healthy pass rush, and I'll just go back to it, that helps out your secondary a lot. The Steelers front seven has always been good at getting to the quarterback, and so that just kind of helps the whole thing mesh. And while they are playing these coverages, I think that when you have like TJ and Alex getting to the quarterback, that just helps the secondary, and kind of like it masks how basic the Steelers defense is when you have guys like that on the field. Even though you're playing in really basic coverages, I just don't think it feels like it all the time because you have those pass rushers.
And to that point, coinciding with that, they don't feel the need to blitz very often, especially like in long. They're about average in short and medium situations on third down, but they're 21st in the NFL in blitzing on 3rd and 7+. So when you have, the front four that you do, they really didn't feel the need to bring the extra guy. But what's interesting is last year they didn't have TJ for most of the season, or not most of the season, but as much time as they did. And you didn't have an effective TJ for most of the season. I'll say that. I would have thought last year would have been the year to kind of break away from that, but that just goes to show like they're not going to break tendency because of one player. Like I think last year they probably could have benefited from being a little bit more diverse with their blitz packages because of not having TJ. But still, like I said, 21st in the NFL at just 29% on 3rd and 7+.
I have your explanation of why they didn't blitz last year. It's because they actually did send Devin Bush on blitzes, except he would just run 2 yards down, get swallowed up by a guard, and
so it didn't register.
They didn't even count as a blitz. So that's what was really happening.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like the guy that would have probably accounted for that was like Arthur Millette coming off the slot, like in a delayed blitz or something like that.
Because there was too many times where I would watch Devin Bush start to run downfield and then stop and then just get swallowed up.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to switch to the offense real quick just to go through these. You talked about the Steelers' run concept frequency. Inside zone has kind of been their bread and butter. They're tied 4th in the NFL at 33%. They do not run power. They do not run counter. They were 30th and 31st in those two. Draw plays, they are pretty high as well at 4%, 8th in the NFL. Interestingly, this doesn't show the NFL rank, but they said on there when talking about it, they are by far first in the league in jet sweeps, like double the amount of anybody else. Now, I know that people aren't going to want to hear that. Here's the thing, though.
Oh, Canada.
The Steelers averaged 6 yards per play last year on jet sweeps. Like, so relatively effective. I mean, you run that literally every single play. You're gaining a first down every single drop. Like you're getting on the 3rd down, you're going to have a first down. Obviously that's not ever going to happen, but they were effective. I think the thing is finding the right player to do it. They might have that this year in Calvin Austin, or they might have that this year if Anthony McFarland stays healthy and is the guy as the 3rd running back. Like, I think that there are ways that the jet sweep can work, and I don't have to go on Twitter and see fans complaining about it for unjustified reasoning just because they don't like Matt Canada and don't want to see a jet sweep and just identify.
Fans are only going to complain about the ones where it's like a 1 yard gain or a no gain at all, and they're not going to talk about the ones that it's like a 20 yard gain.
Yeah, exactly. Does it surprise you though that they are so low in the NFL in power?
Yeah, a little bit. I feel like that would be the run scheme that they could do, but. And I got to say, Jeff Belts at Beaver Area High School, he would be pissed because we ran a ton of power in high school. But yeah, the fact that they're that low in power, and you said counter too, that's a little bit surprising to me.
I think the biggest thing is, and maybe that changes this year. I don't think it will though, just because of how comfortable Kenny is. I think it's because Kenny likes to operate from gun a lot. Like, so I don't think that like that typically you'll see under center. I think because of Kenny's play style and what he's comfortable with. That's why you're going to see them higher in inside zone and draw than anything else.
What did you say that they lead the league in draw?
Not lead the league, but they are top. They're 8th in the NFL. They're 4th in inside zone.
They're 8th. Okay, 4th in inside zone. That makes sense. They do run a lot of zone.
Yeah, but outside zone, just 21%, which is 17th in the NFL. So inside zone and draw heavy last year. We'll see if that continues this year. And then this is where I'm going to get upset. Talking about the passing offense, play action, 26th in the NFL. Yards per attempt, 25th in the NFL. I actually was a little bit surprised by the average depth of target being 12th. That's higher than I would have thought it was going to be. I'm okay with that number. And that's really the only things I'm taking away from this graphic.
If this
play action is what needs.
If this was 2021, the average depth of target, they had to be bottom 5.
Yeah, I would assume so.
I now that you said that, I was thinking like, there's no way that they were 12th. But then I was like, wait, no, Kenny was throwing the ball down the field a little bit more than Ben was. But I don't know if that was just because of the routes the wide receivers were running, as opposed to what they were running with Ben. But yeah, that last year in 2021 of Ben, especially with like a guy like Juju throwing the ball,
he was a running back.
It was like 3 yards, and he would somehow get like 6 or 7 yard gains, like, but that's because he fought for those extra like 3 to 4 yards every single time because he catches the ball 2 yards downfield. That was so annoying.
They basically turned him into a running back those last few years of Ben. So, but all right, that
hopefully those numbers improve.
Yeah,
for the passing attack, and it's interesting that they were what 26th in play action.
Yeah,
and we talked about like several shows ago that they could be introducing more play action.
That's what needs to go up.
That number could go up. And hopefully just the efficiency overall goes up.
Yeah. Well, the thing is too, like everybody should be using more play action. So even if the rank doesn't go up, the usage needs to. Like it's under 20% right now. So that percentage needs to go up. Will it affect that rank? That to me doesn't matter as much as the usage going up. But all right, we actually talked more about the Steelers than I thought we were going to. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be back to talk about Kyle Dubas's pre-draft media availability and just some things that he said, and if there's anything to read into or if it's all meaningless. We'll be right back to talk about it. So actually, first things first with the Penguins, it still does play into Kyle Dubas. They hired Jason Spezza, which we knew was coming in some capacity. It's in the assistant GM role. He's the assistant for a GM that doesn't exist right now. And they
does that mean he's the assistant to Wilkes-Barre's GM right now? Or does Wilkes-Barre have the same GM? I don't know what they did to the management.
I didn't see any change there. I'm assuming it's the same guy.
So does that mean he's the assistant to him?
Well, Dubas is the acting GM, right? He said he was taking over.
I guess that's true. Yeah. That's true. He's taking over the responsibilities.
Yeah. But yeah, so get that out of the way, re-signing Valtteri Puustinen as well. That's kind of the non-Dubas availability stuff to talk about. I think, my first takeaway, right, was the fact that he talked about he has very little desire. He doesn't like to do it. That's buy out players. Obviously, we're in that window now where you can buy out players, and Mikael Granlund makes a ton of sense for them to do so. They only bought out one player in Dubas's time with Toronto, Jared Cowan. Is it Cohen or Cowan? Defenseman, I think at one point, for whatever reason, was linked to the Penguins, spent some time with the Senators. That was the only player, 2016, that Dubas was part of buying out. So I look at that. Historical tendency isn't there. Is he maybe just saying that? I don't think so. I really think he doesn't want to buy out Granlund. He talked about you can get more creative with ways to reconstruct your roster to shed salary that you don't want to have. Wasn't going to come right out and say, yeah, we know we got to do something with Mikael Granlund before next season. But I think internally,
flame the guy on the mic.
I think internally they know like this guy can't be back on the roster. I even though I'm of the mindset now that a buyout is probably unlikely. I'm still not expecting Granlund to be on this team next season.
Yeah, which means it would have to come from a trade. But wouldn't that go back to the point where we're going to have to attach something with Granlund to get a team to take him, and that's what we didn't want to do, and
like,
that's,
you would
or at
think
least that's
so.
what we thought they wouldn't want to do. But
You would think so, but maybe Dubas has a better idea than us. It's like, hey,
yeah, and
there's
maybe
probably a GM out there that will do it.
maybe he feels that there is somewhat of a market for Granlund, even despite his absolutely terrible stint in Pittsburgh. But
Yeah.
if they don't buy him out, which I guess from a GM standpoint, like, yes, you get immediate cap relief of like 4.2 million, 4.18 million, something like that. But then after that cap hit bumps up to like almost 2 million per season for the next like 4 or 5 seasons. So maybe from a GM standpoint, like, you don't want to have that hanging
Especially
over your
one that
head.
knows he's going to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't want to like hurt yourself more than you already are. I mean, you have the little bit of the Jack Johnson buyout still on the cap, and so I can understand it from that perspective. I just can't. It's hard for me to imagine that a team is just going to want to take him, and you're going to have to throw in a sweetener. And I think the sweetener has to be pretty good because you still have 2 more years with Grandin left at that $5 million mark.
And that's the thing.
I
I'm looking at it like, okay, say there is a team willing to take him. There's no way it's to be at $5 million. So then you're retaining salary. And if you're retaining salary, what's the difference between they would probably, in my mind, the most you can retain is 50%. I don't see how a team.
I think the only difference is it's not as long.
Yeah.
That's probably the only way to look at it. But still, I just wouldn't want to do that. I would rather give a better sweetener than retain salary on Granlund, and that's just my personal preference. My personal preference would be buying him out. But the comments that Dubas made just made it seem like that's not going to happen. And like you said, without mentioning his name, he basically just said, we are not looking to buy Mikael Granlund. We're going to try to trade him at all costs, but we're not going to buy him out. Yeah. And so that's really interesting, which is why I guess it wouldn't. I feel like if it was going to happen, it probably would have happened by now because the window's been open for like a week and a half, and he's not bought out yet. That seemed like it was going to be the first thing on Kyle Dubas's to-do list when he gets to Pittsburgh.
Is it maybe waiting to see on draft night if they can get somebody to take him just to move up to 14, like trading back and trading Granlund in the move to trade back?
That could be the case. And I would be open for that. If they stayed in the first round, I'd be open to that idea. I just wouldn't want to trade. And it's funny because I brought this up like 4 months ago, like 5 months ago, like trade or the idea of trading Mikael Granlund and the first round pick together, to just to get rid of him. Mm-hmm. And at the time I was like justifying it, but then I thought about it more, and I definitely wanted a buyout instead of just trading away the first round pick. But if that's the case where they trade back to like in the late 20s, then when the team was able to take him, then I'm fine with that. But the problem is if you're trading back, you're talking about teams that made the playoffs who have more competent GMs than some of the worst teams in the league. And so you're going to have to convince a good GM to take Mikael Granlund. And that's where I think the trouble could run into, because I just don't. If I look at a good hockey team, why would I want Mikael Granlund? That's the issue that I run into when I think about trading back to a team that is in the playoffs already.
Yeah. They'd have to be in love with the prospect they're getting at 14. Like, that's the thing.
That's true. That's probably what you're looking at it. You're looking at it as, and if that's the case, if you're going to a team like that, I imagine the Penguins would still have to retain salary, like you were saying. So you're probably looking at you trade back from 14, you take Mikael Granlund, and we eat probably 50% of the salary. And granted, like that's at least for only 2 years, as opposed to like 5 or 6, whatever the buyout would be. Mm-hmm. But that would still suck.
Yeah,
that's
the thing.
This is just a problem that Hextall brought in, and he does not have to deal with anymore. The fact instead of trading for Granlund.
Yeah, I mean, I think they would have gotten steamrolled, but and there's no way of like, it's just my opinion on it. I think they make the playoffs if they just stand pat. I think they got
I think so
worse
too.
at the deadline, and they
I
only
think
missed by
so
a point.
too.
Yeah.
Not that like Teddy Bluger or Brock McGinn or anybody else in that bottom six was like would have turned around and become scoring machines down the stretch, but I just don't think that you would have had the as bad of like defensive metrics that you would have had down the stretch. And I
Kapanen
think
probably would have hit a random heater at some point, like he always
yeah,
does.
yeah.
So
I mean, maybe he was just primed for one. We saw what he did when he left. Different circumstances, different line mates, But
yeah.
I think that you were just better off. And in hindsight's 2020, of just looking at where they ended up, not making the playoffs in general. Like absolutely, if I could go back, I just wouldn't do a thing to the team. Don't touch it. Just let the season ride out. But obviously, that's not the case. And Ron Hextall should be. Never mind. I can't say that. That will probably get me in trouble. Ron Hextall should be arrested. Yeah, that.
I also thought it was interesting. Dubas talking about free agency, kind of saying like they're not going to go after any big fish. So then you look at the available space. I mean, obviously, probably some guys of their own they want to take care of. Drew O'Connor is the one that sticks out to me the most. Like, sure, like Ryan Paling could be brought back. Archibald for what he provided last year. If you get him at like the same number, I think that's fine. But you don't want to like totally just bring back the entire bottom six, obviously. Like Dubas has in mind what he wants to change. So if there's one guy that's a free agent that I'm looking at bringing back, it's Drew O'Connor out of them, just because I think he can also in a pinch be like, and even as he continues to develop, maybe he is a guy that eventually plays in the top six. But I think for right now, you have a really good bottom six player. But him talking about free agency, saying that they weren't going swinging for a big fish forward or anything like that. One, did that surprise you? Two, did him not mentioning defense or goalie within that, like he specifically said, a big fish forward, make you think that's where he's looking before the, a forward?
Yes, I think that him saying we're not looking at a big fish forward, that would definitely lead me to believe that is looking at either goaltending or defense or potentially both. There's some guys that you could probably potentially move on from if you were coming from, because didn't he say something about he either said it or someone was like alluding to it, that him saying this is not going to come from the free agent market. It would more likely come from a trade. I feel like that could be the case with like a defenseman. If they were going to get rid of a contract like Jeff Petrie, like not that I want to get rid of Jeff Petrie. I would be fine if Jeff Petrie's back, but I think there's trades that could happen that could bring in a different defenseman into the fold. And I think that definitely
I think Brood is the one that
has to look at. Yeah. No, I think so too. Not a great contract for what he provides. And I think that you could improve on that defense. The one area that we've talked about the most over the past 6 months, goaltending, I feel like that's like out of the question that's going to be looked at. And I really hope that they figure something out with that, because we talked about it with Hunter, we talked about it with Jesse and Danny, we've talked about it just ourselves. There's no way that you could sell us on going into the season with the same goalie tandem. There's absolutely no way that could happen. And the fact that the top six, he mentions, like they're not really looking to approve that. Do they need to? That's the really question that I have.
No, I think you just need.
That's the thing. Compared to the rest of the team, the top six is fine for the most part. I mean, obviously, like you're going to have to replace the Jason Zucker if he's not going to be back. But I feel like the top six as just a whole and under the umbrella of the Penguins, that's not the priority to look at this free agency. That's not the area of the most concern, because you still have some of your top scoring guys, Raquel, Sid, Gino, Jake, like those four are still in the top six. I feel like Rust, maybe he has a bounce back year, or even if he has the same year that he had, I would still be okay with him being in the top six on that second line with Malkin. You replace that Zucker spot if he's not back, but that bottom six is what really killed you. So it makes absolute sense why that would be the focus of the forward group, because you got absolutely nothing defensively and offensively last year from that entire group. So I'm fine, like kind of like what you're saying. I'm fine bringing back like one or two of the guys from last year's group in that bottom six, whether that could be a Drew O'Connor, Ryan Paling, Josh Archibald, but the entire group needs an overhaul. and I'm not even mentioning Jeff Carter. I know he's not going anywhere.
Well, you know he's gonna have a spot within that.
Yeah.
I think what you said about the top 6, like with that Zucker spot, I mean, worst case scenario, I think you could get away with playing like Nylander there, or like I said, maybe Drew O'Connor can step up into that role if you get a bounce back season from Rust, and if you get a bounce back season at 5v5 for Gensel. Because I think everybody's going to look at Gensel's goal total last year and think it was a relatively similar season, but the dude had like 7 empty netters. Like it wasn't. He wasn't as good offensively last year as the number on the surface would suggest. So if he bounces back at 5v5 and Russ bounces back, I think you can get away with replacing that Zucker spot with a Nylander or with a Drew O'Connor. But that's an if. So
the Nylander spot would be intriguing to me. Just because we saw him in limited action in the NHL level last year, but I think that Nylander has the pedigree that it just, and I don't know if it's just a name factor that seems attractive to me, like an intriguing idea. I think Drew O'Connor, he could be good on that second line. I just really want to see him in like a full-time player in the NHL, whether that's bottom 6 or not, because he's had stints where he's a full-time member of the lineup or not, but it's only lasted like either several weeks or like a month at a time. I just want to see him for like a full season at the NHL and see what he could do as a full-time forward.
Looked really good for Team USA.
Yeah, whether that's second line or fourth line, I don't care. I just think that 2023, he just needs to be a full-time member of the Penguins and not have to worry about a lineup spot.
Yeah, I'd agree. Continuing on with the discussion, like we said, bottom 6 probably being the focus. Also mentioned they're likely to keep the pick at 14. So I mentioned the idea of potentially trading back, and that'd be the way you shed Granlund. But Dubas seems to really like this draft class and the idea of the player that he could probably get at 14. And, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know, these prospects that are in that tier that they're probably going to have. But I will say that it seems like most people agree that this is a stronger draft than the general one. The Penguins have a higher pick than they normally do. Like, this seems like it is a pretty decent year to be in the spot that the Penguins are in with that middle of the round pick at 14. And Dubas is a guy that, doesn't like moving assets just to move them. Wants to stick at 14, it sounds like. And I can't say that I necessarily have an issue with it. I can't blame him for the Granlund thing. Like, if Granlund, worst case scenario, ends up being on the team next year, it's going to suck, but it's not, I can't blame Kyle Dubas for that.
He didn't do it.
So I'll be interested to see how this whole thing shakes out. But as we sit here right now, I think they're making a pick at 14.
I think so too. And I'll say that I think the only way that first round pick is moved, because I don't even think they're good. If they're going to make a trade back, I think the only way that does happen if it involves Granlund. And I don't think that's going to happen. So I think the only way that pick is moved, move up. Do they have the assets to move up? I don't know. I don't know how. Like, I know what it costs to like move up in the NFL draft. I don't know what it costs to move up in the NHL draft, and I don't know. I don't even have the remote idea, because in the NFL draft, I know if I'm moving up, whether like if the Steelers moved up from 17 like they did to 14, or if they moved up from 17 and if they would have went all the way up to like 8, 9, or 10, like I know that no matter who they're going to pick, it is going to be a guy that is going to play immediately on the Steelers. With the NHL draft, I feel like moving up, that's a bigger question mark to me, because I don't know what it costs to move up in general. And when you're moving up for a player that you're not going to see in the NHL right away, I have no remote idea what that costs. And I just don't know if the Penguins have the tangible assets to be able to move up. Hey, maybe they trade Granlund to move up. I don't know, but when you're moving up, you're talking about worse GMs. So, but yeah, no, I think that's an interesting idea. And Kyle Dubas kind of made remarks that they could be open to moving up or down or staying pat at 14. So I guess it's not off the table. I just don't think that the Penguins would be able to do it because of the assets that they have. I think the only way that they move on from 14 and they don't make that pick is if they make a trade, kind of like what we talked about last week, I believe, or maybe a couple weeks ago with Connor Hellebuyck, or something like that, where you're getting a big name guy either in goaltender, or if they're trading for a number one lefty, I feel like it would be something like that where you are bringing in an in-house name, like this name. It's a big guy, big move, and that's the only way that they're not making that pick at 14. Otherwise, I do think that they stay there.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at something that's like kind of similar. So, like, I was only going back to last year. Chicago or Arizona and San Jose made a trade last year during the draft. That was for pick number 11, and they sent 27, 34, and a second round pick, 45, for number 11.
Okay. So they went up from 27 to 11.
Yeah, and it had to include 34 and 45.
Okay. Well, I mean,
that seems that seems like quite a bit, but you're jumping 16 spots, but you're including 2 second rounders. I know second rounders don't carry as much value in the NHL draft as like in the NFL. That would seem like a crazy trade.
Yeah, and the problem you're going to run into is like the Penguins have 14. They're already fairly high in the draft. And if you want to move higher than that, they don't have a second round pick. They have 1 third round pick. They don't even have their own. They have New Jerseys.
Now I'm not even talking about for them moving up. Now I'm looking at them moving back, like what they could get for moving back. But yeah,
I mean 14 is not far from 11. So if you could recoup a second round pick, and I love how we're talking about like this, like we actually know like if these guys if this would be worth it. But
yeah,
I think they stay at 14 and they're going to make a pick. Mm-hmm. So
same.
I don't think that thing is going to be moved unless, like I said, they're going to trade for a goalie or just a bigger named player.
Yeah. All right. Well, good Pens talk this week. Hopefully we can have our guy Josh Getzoff come on here sometime and talk about free agency and the draft. I know that he's going to be doing stuff for the draft, so it can't be one of those 2 days. We're still figuring out, but Josh will be on here sometime in the near future to discuss it. Was hoping it'd be before free agency, but hey, if not, we'll get to talk about whoever it was that they went out and got. So benefits to both of those. We're going to wrap up the show talking about the Pirates. At least they won at the time of recording this, won last night. So, but they won none of the 10 games before that. So we'll talk about all that. Also, a couple guys coming up when we come back. This is Around the 412. Don't go anywhere. A week ago from yesterday, Friday, the Pittsburgh Pirates were in first place in the NL Central, all alone as they went into that series. As we sit here today, after 9 straight games with the division and then opening up the series against the Marlins, they had lost 10 straight. They finally won yesterday in comeback fashion when it looked like it was going to be 11 straight. Palacios leads off the 9th inning with a hit. A little bit of a rally started with him and McCutchen on the bases, creating some havoc. Santana comes through with a big single to give them the lead. Tucupita Marcano ends up adding on to that. Bednar shuts it down in the 9th, and they end that losing streak. It got to this offense has just completely evaporated top to bottom. Like, there is nobody that I can say right now is like performing the way that they were beginning in the season. Like, okay, McCutchen's still seeing a lot of pitches. He's drawing some. I don't think he's 100% either. He's been dealing with a little bit of an elbow issue. But to me, like, top to bottom, this offense has just, I guess Ke'Bryan Hayes is the one that is hitting better than he was at the beginning of the year because he was really struggling. But they're just getting nothing night in and night out. And you got 2 really solid pitching performances back to back from Keller and Ortiz that were almost both wasted. They still did waste Keller's by blowing that game on Thursday. But just a frustrating team to watch night in and night out. I'm hoping that, the arrival of Henry Davis, and I don't know where you're at with him. I'm not a Nick Gonzales guy. But maybe he does. I'm not going to write him off just because of that. What I feel about him in the minors, like he's going to have a shot to prove me wrong here in the majors. I'm hoping with those 2 arrivals, they kind of provide a spark. I mean, you saw the emotion that Henry Davis had when he walked yesterday. I know that nothing resulted from that inning, but I think his reaction when he got on base, trying to fire up the team, and then he steals second and again, looks at the dugout like, let's go guys. I think that goes a long way for, providing a spark and showing that you care. Like a lot of the times you'll like lean on veterans to provide that, but for a young guy to come up and already like show that he cares that much about winning this game, I think that goes a long way for his teammates. So I'm hoping that between him and Gonzales, hopefully soon let's just keep it rolling. Let's get Endy up here too. Jared Triolo is an infielder that's hit really well. Can also, I think, play some corner outfield in a pinch. I wouldn't be opposed to him coming up. Like, just give these guys some looks, and I think that they can all kind of have that impact where they're new to the majors, and it's just like they don't know yet. So it's like they can just provide an immediate spark, and I think they just got to kind of keep rolling with what Henry Davis showed.
They didn't have to play through the month of May with the Pirates,
That's
so
what
they
I'm
don't.
saying. Like
they're not dead inside.
It's almost like
that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
They're not dead inside because they didn't see the month of May. No, I think that this is a good thing to see these guys come up. I mean, you already saw Henry Davis in his first at bat had that hit, and then you already saw his first home run. He has provided some energy, I think, to the Pirates. Now we're just waiting on him to actually play catcher. It beats me why they refuse to do it.
I don't know if you agree. I think Endy ends up playing catcher in the majors before Henry Davis.
Why do you think that is?
I think they like Davis's bat more. I don't think they like his defense more than Endy's behind the plate.
So do you think they value what like Jason DeLay and Austin Hedges brings defensively?
Oh, I think
over but they're absolute liabilities offensively.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter to them. They're just going to play them for the defense anyway.
Yep. And DeLay's not even that good of a defensive catcher in my opinion. Like I don't know what it is. Like I know that like DeLay's offensive numbers look better than the player that he actually is. Like I by no means view him
not over the last 15 days.
Oh, really? Has he cooled off that much?
I have the Pirates last 15 days up offensively. Okay. Jason DeLay, he's batting 167. His on base is 231 over those last 15 days.
Yeah,
and that's in 9 games. So he's had plate appearances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never viewed him as the guy that was hitting like 308 with like a 400 on base percentage or whatever it was, something stupid. And then we know Hedges is a all framing catcher. Like I can't even say like entirely defense. Like it's because it's not throwing guys out, which I know is harder to do in 2023 than in past years. Mm-hmm. But he doesn't control the run game. He obviously can't hit. Like people just keep talking about the value that he provides that isn't seen. And I get that. Like I know that there are things that are important to the players that we're not going to see. I'm sure he is great with the pitching staff and stuff like that. Okay, great. We lost by 7 runs instead of 10. I mean,
I was like, Hedges is batting .087 over the last 15 days, and his on base percentage is the exact same. He
doesn't walk.
Yeah, he doesn't walk. He has 0 walks. 0 walks over that span in 10 games. So it's really bad and that's why I'm just like, do you really want them just because they play defense on the catcher? Like, do you really devalue Henry Davis's defense that much that you just don't want to play him at catcher?
I mean, even if that's the case, that's where I'm at with like, okay, well then bring up Endy. Like if you think he's the better defensive option behind the plate, have both of them up here. And I know that Endy hasn't like lit the world on fire offensively this year, but I think he's gotten better over the last.
I think he can bat better than .087. I'm willing to bet a lot on that.
Yeah,
that he could at least bat .1.
Yeah.
So,
and the thing is too, like, why do people act like players can't get better at the major league level? Like it doesn't mean.
Where are you going to learn? We saw this with Tyler Glasnow, and this is completely different because it's different coaching staff, different regime. But with Tyler Glasnow, he would light up AAA. He'd come up to the majors. He'd struggle. He'd get sent back down. Like, where can we get the middle ground where it's like you're lighting up it up in AAA? You're going to need to at some time make that adjustment. You're not going to always just be good in AAA and then naturally just carry that into the MLB. There's going to be growing pains at that level. So I don't. Mm-hmm. I think that they should just bring up guys if they're going to be contributing right away. Like I don't see the point in keeping Endy down. I think if you're going to play Davis in the field, like in right field, like he has been, fine, but bring up Andy Rodriguez and provide even more of a spark. That way, you have a defensive catcher, but also somebody who can bat more than 100 in the offense. Hopefully, yeah, it's been bad overall, like the slump. Because looking at some of these numbers, it's absolutely atrocious. I mean, the only guys that over the last 15 days have provided really anything offensively. I mean, Kutch's batting average over the last 15 days is down to 207, but his on base percentage is still 378, and he's leading the team in walks over that span with 8. So he's still at least getting on base. But then, really, the only guys that are providing anything with a bat itself are Brian Reynolds, who's batting 290 over that stretch, who you don't have right now, and Cabrian Hayes has picked it up over the last week. But besides that, everybody is either sub 300 on base percentage, or they are like sub 250 in batting average. It's not pretty. So the whole, and it's not just one guy. The whole team is slumping all at once.
I think what it comes down to is you go up and down the lineup. There's just not a lot of guys that you feel like should be everyday guys at the MLB level. It's like, okay, Connor Joe, great against left-handed pitching. Same with Rodolfo Castro. Those guys are both guys that should play against lefties. Against righties, probably not. We know about Austin Hedges. Ji-Hwan Bae, 1 for his last 23. Jack Sawinski, 0 for his last 26. Like, this can't, like, all this happening at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's, and that's what leads to losing 10 games in a row, mixed with the pitching that you've gotten as well.
And this is how a hitting coach probably loses his job at some point this year.
Yeah, I don't see any value that he brings. Where's the value? I'm looking at the value right now, and it's dog water.
I mean, if he ruins Henry Davis.
Yeah, Henry Davis. That's the thing.
He already looks so comfortable with the plate. Like, he looks like he's been here for months.
He looked ready to be here, which a month ago he was in Double-A. So, that's, and just going back to him, and even like Nick Gonzales. Like, we saw Nick Gonzales make his debut yesterday. Went 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts.
Boy, did he look as overmatched as I thought he was going. See, the problem with him is the swing and miss. Like, he strikes out a ton. He has no feel for pitching sequencing, and I think it showed yesterday. Now, obviously, like, he's going against major league pitching for the first time. So can he adjust to it? But just based off his body of work in the minors, I think he's always going to be that. Like, I think he's always going to be a high strikeout guy. Can he provide enough elsewhere?
Getting, like, even looking at his numbers in the minors, and I know that, like, he did have an injury that set him back since when he was drafted. But for a 7th overall pick, you would think that you would be seeing more consistency with his bat, and
he also
playing for higher average.
That was the talk about him, was that he was going to be like, the hit tool was great because he played in the Cape Cod League and switched to a wooden bat before, like, every other hitting prospect that was coming out that year. So, like, you would have thought he'd be more advanced than anybody else from that class. Now, I don't looking, at a glance as we sit here right now, I'd have to look up who else from that draft class is, like, already performed at the MLB level, but I'm going to do that right now. That was Sherrington's first draft pick, was Nick Gonzales.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I just think it's a guy that you would have expected to have, I guess, better overall numbers in the minor leagues. And I get it. Like, the Pirates are desperate right now. And I'm not saying, like, calling up your former 7th overall pick is a desperation move, but, like, I feel like they're looking for something to improve the team and something to stick. But just speaking of Nick Gonzales himself, regardless of him being called up, you would have liked to have seen better numbers in the minors than you would have gotten from him. And like I said, you did have an injury that set him back, but this is something that, like, you were expecting for him to bat for higher average, not going to necessarily be a big power guy or slugging guy, but somebody that can probably bat like 280 plus. But I think, like, his AAA numbers, when I last looked, like, were around like 250 something. And so, not that this is necessarily terrible, but it's something that you would like better of from a 7th overall pick. And I think that it could technically provide a spark, but I just don't think it's going to be a spark like Henry Davis is, because we've already seen in 5 games, it hasn't been a huge sample size, but Henry Davis is able to get around to MLB pitching. He's able to handle it. And I don't know that Nick Gonzales is necessarily going to be able to. Maybe he can provide defense that necessarily balances out what he does at the plate, but I just don't think he's going to be anything to ride home about when it comes to actually being in the batter's box and like watching his at bats.
Oddly enough, the 2 probably best value picks in this first round were in the 20s, and they were back to back, and they're in the division. Garrett Mitchell at 20 to the Brewers, and then 21, Jordan Walker to the Cardinals, who a little bit up and down. I think he started the season really hot. Obviously, they sent him back to the minors, called him back up, and he's been pretty good again since coming back up. But yeah, those guys went later in the first. It's really not an impressive looking first round now that I'm looking at it. In the second round, though, the Pirates did get Jared Jones, who's been on the show and absolutely flying through the organization now, as he's now up in Indianapolis. So maybe he helps the team even this year in September. But if not, you would think, next year he could push for a spot. So maybe the fastest rising prospect that the Pirates have right now in the organization.
It's crazy because he was 17 when he was on the show. So that only makes him like 20 right now.
Yeah. Yeah, he's 20 or 20, maybe just turned 21 recently. But yeah, he's still super young. All right, and then the last thing, speaking of the draft, is where I want to go with this. Pirates picking 1-1 the whole time. It's been Dylan Cruz, and I will say for me, it still is. But a lot of sites, very reputable sites, and I don't know if it's just for a lack of straying away from what's been chalk for so long, but they now have Paul Skenes, LSU pitcher, at 1-1. How would you feel about that? First off, if it wasn't Dylan Cruz at 1-1, and are you believing this, or do you think it is just, okay, it's been Dylan Cruz. Could we just put something else out there so that if it's not, we got it out there?
I mean, what do we say about the NFL draft? Everything. Granted, we're more than a week away, but anything like within the last week of the NFL draft, it's basically all smoke and just a lot of nothingness. So I think that's probably where this is at.
Okay.
I think it's just another talking point to get out there, because it has just been Dylan Cruz is going to be 1-1. Dylan Cruz is going to be the Pirates' first pick. That's just basically all that's been said. It's probably closer to that. But at least to entertain the idea. I don't necessarily. I wouldn't hate if they took his teammate, especially looking at what the pitching staff looks like right now and how
he could.
struggling.
I honestly think he's as ready of an MLB pitcher as we've had since Garrett Cole. Like
that's what I mean. Like he'd probably spend like a year in the minors and then probably make his debut halfway through the next year. That's kind of the similar track that Garrett Cole was on. I think that I still want Cruz. Like I obviously want Cruz. I think he's by far and away the best overall player in the draft. But if they went with the pitcher, I think it could make sense just looking at the team and organization as a whole. You don't really have a ton of arms that you can just say are like super MLB ready within the next like year or two. Like you have a few. Like you'd hope that like Quinn Priester can make his debut, maybe either at the end of this year or sometime next year. But outside of that, and then you just mentioned Jared Jones, maybe he comes up next year. There's not a ton of arms. So if they went with pitcher, I could at least get the idea from just looking at the organizational standpoint and looking at what the weaknesses are of this team right now, which is almost everything. But the pitching has not been what we had hoped it would be overall, and it's really struggled, especially over the past month. But I still think that it's Cruz. I've said that with multiple people as well. Like my buddy that's visiting right now, Quinn. Like it's Dylan Cruz. It's Dylan Cruz until it's not Dylan Cruz. And I think that this is just basically more of smoke to get people talking about something else, because it's just so. It just basically accepted that Dylan Cruz is going to be the number 1 overall pick. It's just another talking point to get some clicks.
Yeah. So here's the thing for me and why I'm still, if it's close, and I think it is, like, I think Paul Skenes is as good of a pitching prospect as Cruz is a hitting prospect. Like, I feel that way about that. But the reason that the tiebreaker is always going to go to the outfielder for me is, and maybe it's stupid, but like I just assume at this point, Paul Skenes is going to have Tommy John at some point, and we're going to lose a season of him. And a big part of that is the workload that he's had at LSU. I don't know if you've paid attention to this. He has back-to-back starts with 120 pitches. And normally in college, you have the extra day of rest, like it's every sixth day that you. He doesn't. He has been pitching on an MLB schedule, basically. So 120 pitches in back-to-back starts for him at LSU. The workload worries me for the future. Like, I get why LSU's doing
years.
It. Huh?
He's also been there 4 years.
Skenes?
I think so.
This is his first year at LSU. He came from the
but he's a 4-year like college player, right?
Maybe. I mean, he is
I think he's in his 4th year of college.
Because he came from he comes from a military family. He was at a military school and ended up transferring to LSU.
Okay.
This is his first year at LSU for sure. I just don't know how many years in total it's been for him.
Yeah, this is his 4th year in college.
Okay.
2021 at Air Force, Wareham, where that is, Air Force, Louisiana State.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, he definitely is. The thing is, too,
and maybe this is another dumb way to look at it. With an outfielder, I get somebody that can play every day. With a pitcher, I get someone that plays every 5 days. Maybe that's a very ignorant and childish way to look at making the pick. But with the outfielder, I know he could play every single day.
You mentioned I like Paul Skenes. If you take him, obviously is like the number one pitching prospect in the system, even if with the rise of Jared Jones and stuff, and he probably could help at some point in 2024, if not for sure in 2025. Dylan Cruz, hopefully at some point in 2025. But I look at the outfield for the Pirates too. Like you were talking about the pitching. I think if you take Dylan Cruz, he's automatically, you could include Henry Davis, I guess, as an outfielder at this point. He's automatically like the second or third best outfielder in the Pirates' entire organization, like including at the MLB level.
Yeah. No, so, I don't think that's hyperbole.
Yeah.
So.
It's Cruz for me. I think Skenes is awesome. I think, if Washington takes him at 2, that's definitely justified. If I'm looking at it from they're very similar prospects, like Cruz is as good of an outfielder as Skenes is a pitcher, I'm going with the outfielder because of the worry with pitchers.
I'm waiting for it to not be either of them.
There is a third name that's been floated. High school outfielder Max Clark.
I'm looking at it just from the standpoint of I look at the Henry Davis draft. Actually, we weren't talking about Henry Davis before the draft. All the talk was
like Marcelo Mayer and
it was like Marcelo Mayer, Kumar Rocker, Jack Leiter.
Yeah,
and people would have thought like it's going to be Jack. Like everybody during the season was like it's going to be Kumar Rocker, and then it kind of shifted to Jack Leiter, and then they signed Henry Davis. And part of the reason I would believe is because he took less of a signing bonus. What if they run into a situation where Dylan Cruz is like, I want this number, then they're not going to pay it, so they just take somebody else?
Yeah, it's gonna. I mean, we've seen the Pirates. The one area where they do spend is the draft, but are they going to be willing to spend up in that first
like $8 million
1-1 slot to not be able to do as much in the following round? But I've said before. You did Dylan Cruz at 1-1. I don't even care if you draft another player. Like, you could just turn in a
probably not going to see any of those other players anyway.
You could turn in a blank card for the rest of the draft for all I care. The
1-1 slot value is $9,721,000.
Yeah. That's the if they go under in round 1, I think Skenes would be too though. Like Max Clark is the undervalue 1-1 pick to me. So if that's the route, if we see him get his name called at 1-1, it's because they want to spend throughout the draft as opposed to just in round 1.
Yeah. Yeah, because if they maximized their full the full slot value at 1-1, then that would be eating up over half their money, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think their poll is like 16 million. Google knows.
Cruz, I'm in love with. Skenes, that's fine. I'm cool with that. I like Max Clark. Any other year, I'd be cool with it. Not this year.
16.185 million.
Okay.
So yeah, you'd be eating up like around 60% of your if you paid full slot value. But for Dylan Cruz, I wouldn't care.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That just means they like those high school arms and stuff anyway. So that's what the rest of the draft would probably be filled with, was a lot of high school guys that you're taking. Or no, probably a lot of college guys that don't have the option to go back or like choose to go to their college commitment.
Yeah.
You could see both sides. It's either going to be high school kids that are too enticed by that amount of money right away, or college guys that don't have the option to go back to school.
Dylan Cruz is slugging 715. His OPS is 1.278.
It was funny. It was like the last couple weeks of the season before we got to the college World Series and stuff. He was hitting like 393, and it was like, oh, he's cooling off a little bit.
Yeah, his batting average right now is 423.
Yeah,
on the season. Yeah, take him.
That's my guy. That's who I'm taking. Cruz and Cruz for Pittsburgh in the future.
There you go.
A little bit longer of a show than I think we anticipated, but a lot of good conversation, a lot of good talk. I actually spent more time on the Pirates than we typically do, so that was good. But yeah, MLB draft. When is the MLB draft?
2 weeks from tomorrow. So as you're hearing this, maybe I think it's July 9th is when it kicks off.
Okay.
So
we'll get some answers sooner than later. But I'm fine with either of those first two. Cruz is definitely my preference. If they took Skenes, I'm not upset about it. Just not the route that I wanted them to go this entire time.
If they don't take Cruz, they're dead to me.
As
if they already aren't.
I do think Skenes is going to be awesome too. Like, that's the thing, is any other year, like, that's I would feel about him how I do about Cruz if Cruz wasn't in the picture.
It's going to be awesome watching him recover for a year and a half after his Tommy John.
Yeah. I mean, maybe his body can uphold it. Did Garrett Cole have Tommy John? I don't think he has, right?
I don't think so.
Because that's like he is a big dude. Like, he is a horse. So maybe his body just is going to be able to withstand the workload that he's had. He's
never had Tommy John.
Yeah. Well, all right. That'll do it for this episode. Let us know what you guys think about literally anything that was covered, not just the Skenes versus Cruz talk, but obviously the Steelers signing Nick Kwiatkowski is the big news here to talk about. But let us know how you feel about that. Any of the Penguin stuff that we talked about, the best solution to get rid of Mikael Granlund, how you feel about Dubas' comments, and when it comes to the Pirates, Skenes, Cruz, which way are you leaning as we sit here right now? Let us know about that. Of course, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, leave us a comment down below, leave us a 5-star review wherever you can. Follow us on all of our social media platforms. Check out the links in the description. Check out Keeks Barbershop, who, as always, is the best sponsor in the world. New location, by the way. Check out the pictures of his new location. Awesome stuff. But we will be back next week at some point. I know it was super rare to see us this day of the week, but we'll be back next week at some point, probably a little bit more like you guys are used to seeing. But until then, for Smitty, for Tyler, this has been Around the 412, and we'll see you then.